I want to talk about creativity today. Creativity is something that honestly is kind of mysterious to me in many ways. And it's something that I would love to learn more about and that I'm always trying to learn more about. So this is going to be a video on, maybe sharing some of the ways that I found to be creative in myself, how to access that side of myself and to really facilitate a space for being creative. And also the struggles around creativity, maybe not in that order. What is it that makes it difficult to be creative? When do I struggle to be creative? And what can I do when I'm struggling? And this is a video as much for me as it is for you, because today I'm having a hard time getting into the flow. So I thought that making this would be helpful. So here goes. So I mentioned flow just now. So flow is really, really important to creativity. So being in the flow, it's like being in the zone. Flow state, you're in an experience of complete absorption in the task that you're doing. It tends to happen more with tasks that meet your skill level, so tasks that aren't too challenging but aren't too easy, and that you also care about and are interested in, care about, passionate about. It helps when you have a span of time to be in the flow and to get into the groove of it. If you don't have much time, it can be kind of hard to get into the flow. And it's also, it's also easy to kick yourself out of the flow by being self-conscious, being perfectionistic. Going into that kind of mindset does not help get into the flow. So that alone, the assumption here in this way of looking at it is that the only challenge is getting into the flow. Like if you're in the creative flow with whatever you're doing, you have full access to your creativity, and you get the bonus of having real fulfillment and connection with the task that you're doing. So we could talk about creativity purely in terms of that model of how to get into the flow state. We could also say, I don't think that's the only way of looking at it. Another way that's useful to look at it is the creative muse. So the creative muse is you can have an experience where you're doing something, you're working on something as you normally would, and then inspiration strikes, or you find that suddenly you're filled with all this creative energy that doesn't feel like yours, if you've ever had this experience, but you suddenly have access to all this insight that feels transpersonal. It doesn't feel like yours. It feels like it comes from some higher plane or something, almost like divine inspiration. And this is the idea of the creative muse. So a lot has been said about the muse, but the basic idea here is that if you show up, good ways for building a relationship with your creative muse or with the divine essence of creativity, whatever you want to call it, showing up at the same time every day, not expecting the muse to come, but being aware that it could, showing up without expectations. I guess also doing things to give you greater access to it. So cultivating and nurturing a sense of playfulness. Play and creativity are quite closely linked. If you can have fun, if you can play, and you can practice getting into a state where you're playful, then you're going to have much easier time having the space within yourself for inspiration to strike in that way. Another way of looking at creativity is connections between things you already know. So if you have a bunch of things that you care about and that you're interested in, and you write them down, and you look at them, and you make connections, like explicitly look and think, how do these two topics connect to each other? So I guess this one would be applicable for people making content. Take two topics that are interest to you and connect them together, or maybe multiple topics. Get into this practice of supporting those connections to form. So if you're explicitly looking for connections between things, your mind will sort of like switch on in that way and start looking for connections between things. So you make all these connections and have all these insights doing that, and that will very quickly get you into quite a creative space. Brainstorming is a similar idea. That one is centered around not allowing your perfectionistic mind to switch on. So brainstorming would be just writing down, like having an idea to create something, and then just writing down everything you can about that thing, just to get yourself primed and into the state of, okay, I'm not going to edit myself as I'm creating this thing. I'm just going to allow inspiration to come forth, brainstorm it out, and then I'll be in a much better state to start maybe editing it later, or introducing some of that later. So brainstorming can be very helpful. And a version of this I've been doing recently for writing is called Morning Pages. And the basic idea is you write, the standard way of doing it is you write 3 pages of long form writing on A4 paper. And you do it with a pen. You don't type it out, although I guess you could. It's recommended that you write it out. And you do it stream of consciousness, so you don't edit anything that you are writing. So you just write it out without editing it. And the idea behind this, if you do this every morning, it gets you familiar with what it's like to actually, I've only done this for a while, but it gets you familiar with what it's like to be in that, be surprised by your own mind. Like you'll come up with all these insights, and stuff will come out of you just writing stream of consciousness. Some of it will be crap, and that's fine, and some of it will be like actual gold nuggets that you can use. That's another thing you could do, is to do practices that get you into the space of like not editing, not being perfectionistic, because you can look at your creativity as like younger, more childlike or more sensitive parts of yourself. And if you try to crush them or suppress them or control them, they just don't work, right? So that's another way of looking at it in terms of parts, right? Your creativity comes from the parts of you that are not, that are much less, probably much more sensitive, much more open, and much harder to control. So you have to let them kind of run free a little bit within a safe container that you've set up. I had something else. This is good. I'm enjoying talking about these different frames or ways of looking at creativity, because there are many different ways that you can look at it and many different things you can try. And struggles that you might have with creativity. We already alluded to perfectionism. So this is one of my big ones, is, just getting into this pattern of, it's really quite a forceful pattern. It's like not allowing yourself to create something or, write something, record something, whatever, as you would naturally. Instead, you have to edit yourself whilst you're doing it to try to control how it's perceived by someone or by an audience when you put it out. And it's sort of a whole mindset that's very control-y, very contractive, and quite painful. And obviously, if you get into that every time you try and create something, you're never going to make anything, because you're going to hate it, which is the problem I had a lot with this, with making these videos for a long time, is that I just like easily got into the perfectionistic mindset when editing, and it stopped being fun, and so I stopped doing it, right? So this stuff is serious. So perfectionism's a big challenge. Another challenge would be, I would say something like overwhelm, or trying to take on. So we talked about this with flow, but like, you can get into the flow if you have a right fit task that's not too easy, not too hard, like the Goldilocks of creative projects, right? So if you start with the really, really heavyweight, challenging task that requires you to have preloaded all of this stuff into your mind, then you'll get overwhelmed and you'll start being avoidant. When met with overwhelm, avoidance is a common thing that comes up, at least for me. And then you'll just spend the day avoiding creating stuff because the task seems too big and too heavy for you to actually make progress on it, because you haven't split it up into subtasks and you aren't really clear about what it is you haven't broken it down enough to make it easy for your mind to like latch on and get into the flow. So when this happens, you'll want to really break down and granular, make your tasks granular, so that it's very, very easy for you to get back into it. Ernest Hemingway, I remember, had a great line on this, which was something like, he always stopped when he was at a good point where he knew what he was going to write next. He never stopped when he was stuck. So that's important, because you don't want future you to wake up and start writing when you're stuck. You want to be eager to write the next page, and then you're going to wake up with energy to continue. So it's a mind hack, but it totally works, because you have to get your mind into a prime state ready to make stuff. So that's really important. A corollary to that, or something that you can take from that also, is start the day with really, really small, easy, but kind of fun tasks that you've prioritized, right? Do the fun stuff first, and then it's going to get you into the state, and then you will avoid this thing I suffered from today, which is this getting into this avoidance spiral where the task is too big, and so you just avoid it, and then you waste your time. So do the nice, easy tasks first, and try to make it easy for your future self by stopping at a place where it's easy to continue, rather than stopping somewhere where there's a big, hefty task coming up in front of you. Because your mind does have to get into gear. You do have to get into a certain state where it's easy for you to hold a lot of abstractions. Certainly if you're creating something complex, there's a lot you have to hold, a lot of abstract things you have to hold, and you can't do that unless you're kind of engaged and tapped into it. Another thing that's important to note about creativity, maybe this is the last thing we'll see, is when so I've taught many courses, many 3-month courses where people are learning programming for the first time. So they'll go through this boot camp, and most of it is, students have projects, but most of it is like taught material. And as part of it, you're programming and you're learning how to think like a developer each day, and you're kind of the learning and the work you do builds on itself, so it gets more and more complex until you can build more fairly complex projects by the end. But one thing that is really interesting to observe is like you're working on something, you're writing some code, and you get stuck, or you're trying to create something and you get stuck. And then what happens is you take a break. Maybe you take a break for the whole day and you sleep, the best kind of break, or you just take a walk or something. And lo and behold, when you come back, you solve the thing easily, or you get unstuck easily. So this is the power of your subconscious mind. When you are stuck with something, when you have a creative problem to solve, and you feel really stuck and you're just staring at your computer screen, go take a break, go take a walk, and just let yourself think freely about, again, it's like getting out of that perfectionist, like kind of locked down state of mind, and allow yourself to think freely, and then come back to the thing you're doing. And what will happen is that there's a very good chance that you will have a solution. So this is the classic thing of the most creative thoughts come when you're in the shower, right? Or when you're on a walk or doing something that's kind of where your brain is in default mode network state, where you're not trying to solve a problem, but you were working on a problem before, and now you've taken a break from it, and now it, you know. So this has been useful for me to say, and I realized that my challenge today was just like simply I had a very large task on the top of my to-do list that was too big, and I wish that, and in future, I will be more careful to leave stuff in a state where it is easy to pick it up the next day. And then when it comes to I want to say one last thing, which is when it comes to being in a flow state, a lot of it comes down to self-trust, and like you can't force yourself into a creative state. It can happen, and it happens more easily if you don't try to force it. You can create the conditions for it though, and you can show up. The more, I want to say one more thing about it, I really believe that the more expectations and beliefs and shoulds you impose upon yourself when you're creative. So obviously you want some space or some time where you can do work on a creative project. But if the more shoulds and expectations and stuff you impose upon that space, the less likely, the less access you have to creativity. So scrap all expectations of what is going to come out of, like, what is going to come out of the creative session to the best of your ability, and trust that if you show up and have an intent, you really want to make something, and you show up, then something is going to come out of it. And it's much more likely to happen if you're not forcing it. So hope this was useful to you. I know it was very random and took a lot of different detours there, but yeah, creativity is a huge topic, and I'm sure I'll be talking about it a lot more in the future. Have a great day, and see you later. Bye-bye.